Star Wars Outlaws is finally here, but before you jump into this massive open world, there are loads of settings you need to change to get the best experience, regardless of the platform you're playing on. You really don't want to miss any of these, so stick around. Also, a huge thanks to Ubisoft for providing me with the game and making the video possible. So, first things first, boot the game up and head on over to the settings menu. Before changing anything here though, you should add the game to your playing list on my new free app that I've developed completely alone for all us gamers to use and enjoy. My backlog allows you to track and manage your game collection in a way not possible anywhere else, with automated account linking, time to beat integration, playtime tracking, advanced recommendations, custom lists, a whole array of social features, and so much more, with a lot more to come too. It's free to download on both Android and iOS via the links in the description. I genuinely do think that this is a must-have for all gamers and would really appreciate your feedback. I've put a year of effort into this and I'm spending hundreds a month to host it, so please, give it a try. Anyway, setting number 1 is in the gameplay section under the visual subheading and is to enable Explorer mode. All this does is remove that super bold yellow glow from everything you can climb to significantly increase immersion, and it not being there won't be a problem at all, as it is still highlighted with a button prompt when you get nearby. Settings 2 and 3 are just below this and are the view angle options, which you should definitely increase. This is essentially the FOV slider, but does work a bit differently in Outlaws in the sense that it also seems to move the camera up slightly in certain scenarios, so don't increase it too much like you might in other games, but do still mess around with it until you find a sweet spot. For me, that's 90 for the main option and then 70 for the aiming option. This way I can still see a lot more of the environment around me whilst the camera remains at a comfortable angle, and it's also great for making things like riding your speeder or even simply sprinting just feel a heck of a lot faster. Speaking of sprinting, that takes us to the 4th setting, which is under the movement subheading and is to enable the always sprint option. This is especially great for us controller players, as you now don't need to keep L3 pushed in to be moving at full speed, and once you've got the stick pushed forward beyond a certain threshold, K will automatically start sprinting. This feels a lot smoother to me, and I'm not really sure why this isn't on by default. If you're using a keyboard and mouse though, then yeah, fair enough. Keep it off, as your keyboard obviously can't detect how strongly you've got a key press down. Oh, and whilst we're here, I should also mention this auto perfect cooling setting. Now, I do keep this off, but if you find the weapon cooling minigame thing a bit annoying, then enabling this will effectively turn that off, but I personally do like the extra level of complexity it adds to blaster combat. Also, let me know in the comments which syndicate you think you'll do the most killing for on your playthrough, and I'll be sure to give you a heart. I'm currently staying most loyal to Crimson Dawn, but to be honest, I might end up betraying them for the Huts pretty soon. Moving on, the 5th setting to change is under the minigames heading and is to change the Kessel Sabak card header to simple numerals. This ensures that when playing Sabak, it's much easier to read the cards on the table from a distance, or even the ones in your hand, in comparison to the sort of sci-fi numbers or shapes. On a similar note, setting number 6 is to enable the numbered buttons option for the slicing Wordle minigame, as it helps increase the readability of the different options in comparison to the really random shapes. There are a lot of other options for the minigames here too, so I would recommend you glance through them yourself, but those are the main 2 I'd actually advise changing and have also changed myself. Anyway, going further down the menu, you'll find setting number 7, which is to disable auto throttle in pursuit mode. This means that when you target an enemy spacecraft, your ship no longer does all of the work for you, and whilst that does mean dogfights are technically harder, it gives you much more control and results in a greater sense of immersion and a greater sense of accomplishment when you do eventually come out on top. Now, setting number 8 is also in regards to space combat, but is found under the controls section and is then in the advanced controls submenu. Here, you want to find the Starship aim assist option and switch it to manual aim. Again, this will undoubtedly increase the difficulty of space combat, as the game is no longer doing all the aiming for you, but without altering these last 2 settings, it really does feel like the game is doing all the work and you're just watching a cutscene, so do change them and unlock that full manual control to allow yourself to feel truly immersed when flying around the Star Wars universe. Moving up from here, the 9th setting is to swap ping objective and Nick Sense. This makes accessing Nick Sense on a controller much faster, as you now only need to tap the up button rather than hold it, and considering it is something you use in high stress situations, this being a quicker action than looking at an objective just makes a lot more sense to me. Oh, and if you are on controller, give this motion sensor function option a go. It's sort of an in-between of aiming with a mouse and aiming with thumbsticks, and it can feel really good when you get used to it, so give it a shot, no pun intended, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Whilst on the topic of controllers, I should also mention that I have tweaked my look sensitivity up to 7 and have lowered my dead zones down to 2 stops above the point where controller drift began to occur. I recommend that you play around with these values for yourself and just figure out what's best. The same goes for if you are using a mouse, but there are obviously so many different possible hardware configurations here that I don't have time to cover the best options for each. I do personally prefer that higher sensitivity and lower dead zone though, as it increases how fluid and responsive the game feels. Anyway, the next few settings are all under the display and graphics section, with setting number 10 being to change the cinematic display mode to full screen. By default, this is forced to 21:9, but all this does is cover up the top and bottom of the screen with black bars, and it even somehow lowers performance. I initially thought that this must actually be a wider aspect ratio, but no, it genuinely literally just hides 30% of your screen, so turn this off immediately. This is such a strange default choice that I imagine must have been to force consistency with the cutscene framing and the films. Sure, it is nice that the choice is here, but yeah, it being defaulted to 21:9 on console is super weird, so turn it off and thank me later. If you're on PC, then just ensure your aspect ratio is set to whatever the ratio of your monitor is. Going down from here then takes us to the 11th setting, which is motion blur. Normally, I'd suggest to turn this off completely, and if you're playing on PC above 60 FPS and aren't using FSR, then that is exactly what you should do. However, for us console players, it's a little different. If you opt for a 60 FPS performance mode, then bring it down to 3. If you're using a 120Hz screen and have access to the 40 FPS quality mode, then keep it at 5, and finally, if you decide to go for a 30 FPS quality mode, then ramp it up to around 7. I've experimented with all 3 modes a lot and have found that these are the best options for each, as it is really needed to help disguise resolution upscaling issues. As for the choice between the graphics modes, it is ultimately down to personal preference, but I'd encourage you to use the 30 FPS or 40 FPS quality modes. They both deliver a constant frame rate and are considerably sharper than the approximate 1080p performance mode, which does dip down to the high 40s and low 50s quite frequently, so it feels really unstable to play, which is a real shame. Anyway, next on this list is setting number 12, which is film grain, and I'd advise you disable it. It's a post-processing filter that's meant to make the game look like it's being filmed through a camera used for the films, but I find that overloading the screen with noise is just purely a distraction that detracts from the immersion. I'd only keep it on if you are using the performance mode or low graphics settings on PC, as it can help disguise low quality textures. Similarly, setting number 13 is also a post-processing filter in the form of chromatic aberration, which I'd strongly advise turning off. This adds a rainbowing lens effect around the edges of the screen or certain elements in the world, again to try and replicate the feeling of the cameras used for movies, but I'd personally rather be immersed as though I'm actually in the game and not watching it through a movie lens, so have turned it off. Moving on, setting number 14 is back in the Starship control section we were at earlier, and is to change the boost option to hold instead of toggle. If you are using a keyboard, this is a must, as like those other Starship settings, it feels like it gives you more control over the ship, and I think this is only set to toggle by default because when using a controller, it is really difficult to press the face button to activate it while still being able to steer. However, if you have a controller with rear buttons or paddles, you should 100% enable this, as that won't be a problem and will elevate the experience even further. Speaking of rear controller buttons, this controller has 4 of them, in addition to triggers that are both adaptive and mouse click, is immune to stick drift and so much more. If you want to see my full review of it, click the video on screen now. Also, please drop a like if you found any of these settings useful, and don't forget to check out my new app, My Backlog. I'd really appreciate it.